Got a little bit of a different setup today and will for the next few videos because I am at a writing retreat. But before I dive back into my next work in progress, my next suspense novel, we got to catch up on the Daybell trial. There's a lot going on. We've had a full week. Monday through Thursday is what they're doing in Arizona. Right now, let's talk about just a couple of things that are different about how Arizona handles things versus Idaho, just as far as logistics that I find really interesting. And then let's talk about opening statements. Because again, remember, Lori is representing herself. This is going to be a dumpster fire, folks. Let's talk about it. If you're new here, I'm Annette Lyon, USA Today best-selling author of the suspense novel Just One More and a whole bunch of other stuff. Also award-winning author, former editor, a whole bunch of other things. Here we discuss true crime often, but not always, where it intersects with religion. And then we have chocolate on the side because you gotta have something sweet in the middle of all the bitter. I have opinions. I rant. That's what we do here. We respect all faith traditions and those with no faith traditions. That includes my faith as well. A quick reminder to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel and helps other people find this kind of content who would be interested in it. Ready? Let's go. So the day began on Monday, April 7th, 2025 with opening statements. But before we got there, we had to start late because a juror didn't show up on time. Apparently that had something to do with their employer and not letting them off for jury duty in time, or there's some mix-up. Apparently that got ironed out. But it sounds like we have lost two jurors already, which means we only have two more alternates. I believe we almost lost a third. My understanding, this was actually on day 2, if I recall correctly, that one of the jurors, after seeing some body cam footage, which we'll get to probably in the next video, said, I think I remember seeing that a few years ago. I think a friend showed me some of this on YouTube. It seemed familiar. So they talked about it in judges' chambers. I believe that juror was allowed to stay on because they didn't know anything else about the case. They just vaguely remembered seeing this video that was familiar. Apparently, Brandon Boudreaux was present in the courtroom. If you recall, Brandon is the subject of the next trial Lori will be facing in Arizona. She is going to be on trial for the attempted homicide of Brandon Boudreaux, who, at the time of that alleged crime, was married to her niece, Lori's niece, Melanie, now Pulaski. He is on Lori's witness list, and so there was that question, well, can he stay in court? If he is going to be a witness for Lori, the answer would be no. There's the exclusionary rule. So that was all brought up, and the state asked for permission for Brandon to stay. Lori, of course, argues no, that he is needed as a witness and that he should have gotten a subpoena by now. But of course, working for herself, pro se, the delivery has been delayed or whatever. But the judge then asks what relevant information can he provide that would help the jury make a determination as to whether the crime is more or less likely to have occurred in this trial, meaning the conspiracy to commit homicide against Charles, Lori's 4th husband. And she literally said that he can provide things. He knows things. The state, Trina K, prosecutor, rightly said, we need to know more than things. That's not enough information for us to just say, okay, let's let him in onto the witness list. And the judge agreed. We need more than that. So then she's like, well, do you expect me to reveal my entire defense strategy? So that made me wonder, okay, so she does have a defense strategy. Does that just mean in cross-examination, or is she planning on actually putting on a defense, unlike her team in Idaho? If you recall, all they did was say, the state has not proved their case, we rest. So I wonder, so we'll see. Judge calls a sidebar, no surprise. The way they're handling sidebars, because Lori is restrained, she's not allowed to move beyond the defense table and the podium, is that they have these headphones with microphones, and so the judge and the state and Lori can talk to each other in sidebar, and then they blast white noise throughout the courtroom. They mute it so we can't hear anything, and then they move the camera up onto the ceiling or onto the seal of Arizona so we can't see even like mouths moving on the judge. So they have a long sidebar. It was long, very, very long. Part of it, I imagine, was not just the Brandon and Boudreaux situation, but also the late juror situation, bringing the jurors in, whatever else. Eventually, though, Brandon was allowed to stay in the courtroom. He is struck from Lori's witness list without prejudice, so that if she comes up with actual evidence, say text messages that he'd sent that would be relevant to this crime, not his, that then he might be able to be put back on her list. But in the meantime, he is allowed in the courtroom. We also learn that 2 of Charles's sons from a previous marriage were also in the courtroom. So here's where some things get interesting as far as things that are different just from a procedural standpoint. In Idaho, anytime there was like a report that a witness was testifying about, if they forgot information on it, they were allowed to refresh their memory by looking at the paper, but then they had to put it face down before they could speak on it. And so it had to be just from memory. Apparently in Arizona, we've had times already where people have read directly from papers in front of them, like their own reports. But that actually makes more sense to me. Another interesting difference is that jurors get to ask questions. They don't like raise their hand and verbalize them, they write them down. And then after we've had the direct examination and then cross and then redirect, recross if need be, then before the witness is released, the judge asks if the jury has questions, and if they do, they will have written them onto these little note cards that are then passed forward. Then the judge looks at them, sees if any of them are eligible, essentially. Is this something we can ask? Is it relevant? Whatnot? And if so, then he'll ask those questions. We've had maybe 4 or 5 so far in this first week. Nothing earth-shattering. Opening statements were quite powerful. I was impressed at how Trina Kay, the prosecutor, approached it. And a lot of the witnesses too. She's done a really good job of handling the religious aspect respectfully, which is an important thing because, guys, reiterating, I'm not here to proselytize. I'm here to give context into Latter-day Saint stuff. But I get very frustrated when people poke fun at the faith because Lori does not represent us. And I don't know why it is that the Latter-day Saints are allowed to be the butt of everybody's jokes. No other denomination gets to have that, and it just frustrates the heck out of me. But Trina Kay does open up with some texts between Lori and Alex saying, we're going to be like Nephi, you and I. So context there. Interestingly, so many Latter-day Saints who have become murderers like to use Nephi as an excuse, and that pisses me off. If you know the context of that Book of Mormon story and that prophet, you know it doesn't wash. Nephi, yes, was a prophet from the Book of Mormon. When his father was prophet, however, he's a young man, Nephi was at this point, not yet a prophet, but he and his brothers, the whole family has to flee Jerusalem. This is shortly before the Babylonian captivity, and they're told they need to flee because Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, and their father people had a target on his back, and so they fled. But they need to go back to get these scriptures that Laban has, this very rich leader. Think of, an ancient oligarch, sort of. And apparently a distant relative. They go in 2 different times, Nephi and his brothers. They almost get killed. They get all their riches stolen from them because they tried to buy the plates. Then the 3rd time, Nephi goes by himself. Now, by this point, his brothers have already tried to kill him. And an angel comes down and stops it. But Nephi then goes back into Jerusalem by himself, thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get these plates, but I'm whatever. And essentially, the story goes that Laban is drunk out of his mind, passed out on the street, and the spirit tells Nephi, take his sword and kill him. I've delivered him into your hands. And Nephi is like, whoa, 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 whoa. I don't want to kill anyone. I've never killed anyone. I don't want to kill anyone. I'm not going to kill anyone. And the spirit basically says, it's better that one man should die than an entire civilization perish in unbelief. The idea being the scope and the scale is huge. So putting this into modern terms, in a sense, it would be like, it would be okay to kill Hitler if that prevented millions of deaths. It's that scale. If you look through the rest of Nephi's story, when he becomes prophet, everything else, there are many, many, many times where his brothers nearly kill him, try to kill him, try to kill his family. Never again does Nephi kill. Ever, ever again. In fact, to protect his family, they leave. Once they get to their promised land, he is like to his brothers, like, fine, take the land. You can have the land that we built. Fine, we'll leave for our safety. Never again does Nephi ever kill again, ever, even when his life was in danger, many times over. So the idea that Lori and Alex and the Laffertys and others have used the story of Nephi killing Laban as a justification to kill random people that they want out of their way is it it doesn't it's apples and oranges. It's literally like, oh, I want to get rid of my husband, my brother-in-law, my whoever, my sister-in-law in the case of the Laffertys, over killing someone who was literally could affect generations of lives. So that's the distinction there. So not cool. So the opening statement of the state also talks about castings, like when they're casting out the spirits, the demons that we've heard in Idaho. We will have Serena testify to that, Serena Sharp, as well as Christina Atwood. Then we learned something new. This was at least new to me. I wasn't aware that Lori had admitted to crushing some of JJ's pills and putting them in Charles's drinks.
Uh-oh.
Which is like, oh my gosh, guys, this is like the new way to kill someone. This is Corey Richins. This is James Craig. Look at my playlists on them. What the heck? Let's not do that. That didn't work, obviously. But gosh, she mentions how Adam, Lori's older brother, not the shooter, but the other one, we'll hear her from Adam and iCloud stuff that we did not hear in Idaho, which is, they don't bring up Idaho again, but there's iCloud things that I'm sure we will hear from Arizona that we didn't learn about in the Idaho trial. We learn again about the plans for an intervention. And to clarify, it was the stake president, not the bishop they're hoping to talk to, which makes sense because the stake president is a higher authority. The bishop is just on the congregation level. Stake president is more like I've heard it compared to the head of a diocese in the Catholic Church, like it's a larger group geographically. And on top of that, a bishop doesn't have power to excommunicate someone. A stake president does. I believe either one can remove a temple recommend, but to have a stake president on your side would be a big deal. And we find out later in the trial that the stake president, his last name is Holmes, which is fitting for a mystery or a murder situation. So President Holmes was actually a family friend, and Adam had actually been in his congregation at one point. So stake presidents are like bishops and anyone else in the church as far as leadership. It's a lay leadership. This is something they do not as a full-time job, not as a career. They're not trained. This is time spent outside of their regular career time, and it's a lot, and they don't get paid for it. We learned that a day or two before Charles's death, that Lori and Alex had an almost 1 hour phone call. I think she said 56 minutes, as they were planning what they were going to do. We also learned that Charles had a date the night before he died with a woman who he met on a dating app, an LDS dating app. And her name is Nancy Jo Hancock. She was on the witness list for the state. That was one of those names I was unfamiliar with. We hear from her. She testifies this week. It's fantastic. And she had a great date and thought they were going to meet up again the next day afternoon sometime. That wasn't a specific set time because Charles had things he had to do, including taking JJ to school. But the idea was that she would hear back from him, and then she never did. And she thought he ghosted her until she found out on the news that, oh no, his brother shot him the very next day, and that's why he didn't ever text her back. We learn about some of the texts that Adam and Charles sent back and forth as they were planning this intervention, how Adam was flying in to make this happen. We see some of the texts that Charles read that morning when Charles first approached the house. Lori was saying, and that, oh my goodness, Alex's truck is outside. This is creepy. And Adam had this horribly bad feelings that they're planning something. And Charles responded something to the effect of, oh, definitely. Or absolutely, something like that. Adam then says, okay, I'm going to text Alex and see if he'll, to pressure him to come pick me up. Let's see what he does. That text was not read until after noon. By then, Charles was already dead, and Lori had the phone. And also in the opening statements, this is their statements. We don't have the evidence yet, but this is what they're stating, that Charles arrived, knocked on the door of his own wife's house that he was paying the rent on, and that alerted both Lori and Alex, who were inside, that he was there, putting the plan in motion. Then Lori took his phone, specifically to keep him at the house so that he could not escape the plan that Alex was going to then carry out. I didn't realize that Lori, when she left with JJ and Tylee, that it was in his rental car. I thought it was her own car, but it was the rental car that Charles had because he'd just flown in from Houston. That's messed up. Taking his phone and his car, she literally trapped him in that house, knowing what was about to happen. That makes it even more damning, in my opinion. So we learned that he was shot in the heart, right in the chest. There was an exit wound in the back. And the evidence is consistent with it that would have made him drop on his back, fell down, and then that he was alive long enough to reach up with his dominant left hand and touch the wound. There's blood on that hand, and both hands ended up at his sides when he was found. There's another wound. We know he was shot a second time. So it looks like Alex was standing at his feet, probably where he was roughly for the first shot, and then it went into the bottom part of his abdomen. So on the front, that's all you could see was a second hole in his abdomen, but then it came out his shoulder. It was like a 13-inch trajectory. And that bullet ended up lodging itself into the floorboard. They said the second wound was clearly not accidental, and the medical examiner will testify that it was not defensive. Lori has left the house by this point in Charles's rental car with Tylee and JJ. She goes to Burger King. She goes to Walgreens to get some flip-flops. She takes JJ to school. She goes back to the house with Tylee. In the time she is gone, she has 2 calls with Alex, 47 minutes since the time she left the house until Alex finally calls 911. When the fire department arrives, they find a baseball bat on the floor, but it appears staged. They say it's on his right hand side as if Charles had dropped it, but he was left-handed. Now, Lori later sends in her opening statement, he pitched left-handed, but he batted right-handed. It sounds like to other people who later testified that no, he was left-handed, period. But he was also semi-pro. He had been drafted, we learned this later on in the week, that he was drafted by the Houston Astros into a semi-pro league, a AAA league, I believe. And then had to quit when he had to retire when he blew his knee out. We learned that on Thursday, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit. The idea that he could have hit Alex in the head enough to draw even a little bit of blood, and that's all the evidence there was, is bizarre. Head wounds bleed a lot. If you have a nosebleed, if you have just a little tiny cut, I once had a little tiny cut, like right here in my hairline when I was in 2nd grade, and it bled like nothing else. And it had to have a couple of stitches, but that thing just bled and bled. If Charles, an athlete who was still in very good shape and much stronger than Alex, has swung that bat at Alex's head, Alex would have been unconscious probably. There would be a dent in the bat. There wasn't. There would be blood on the bat. There would be no blood anywhere in the house, except for a little tiny bit on one of the faucets in the kitchen. That's it. Nowhere else. No other blood, aside from a Charles zone right at the scene. So the state made a point of saying evidence doesn't lie, and the lack of evidence also doesn't lie. There was no blood anywhere, and there should have been if Charles had actually hit Alex with the bat. Supposedly there was a scuffle with Tylee to get the bat from her, and they were on the floor wrestling with Alex and Charles, and if any of that had happened, there would be some evidence. A scratch in the wood floor. One of the many mirrors, there were 2 walls of mirrors, because this whole room was empty, because this was Lori's dance room, even though it was like a family room, which is weird. But there were 2 walls full of mirrors. Not a single dent or scratch or anything in any of the mirrors. Not a tiny piece of shattering, nothing. Then when she finally does show up, the cops come to her and they have to give her that sad death notification, which is one of the harder things a police officer ever has to do, is to say, "We are sorry to inform you that your husband has been shot and killed." And she goes, "Oh, I know." Just absolute. We saw some of this body cam later on, but just the very fact, she's just so incredibly flippant about it. Like, not a big deal. Who cares? Yep, oh, I already know. And the cops are like, whoa, that's weird. We also know that eventually she and Tylee were brought to the station for questioning. And nothing Tylee said can be used in court, which is good because Tylee was covering for her mom. She spent her life trying to get in her mom's good graces. If that were allowed, Lori would totally use Tylee's words to defend herself. But there is a law in Arizona, meaning you cannot profit from your crimes. And since she has already been convicted of Tylee's death, that homicide, she can't use Tylee's words to aid herself, which I think is lovely. So karma. Nothing in the opening statements from the state mentions Chad being married. She does mention that one of the motives for all of this was that Lori wanted to become Mrs. Daybell, but she doesn't mention that Chad was married at the time. They were having an affair. That Tammy died. None of that. There's no mention of Tylee dying or JJ dying. So it'll be interesting to see how much of the Idaho stuff comes in down the road. We still have weeks left of this case. We'll find out. There's one little point I disagreed with on the state. They made a huge point of saying that Alex, well, he was acting oddly calm, so I agree with that. But they said they had these sunglasses on the top of his head, and if there had been a scuffle, wouldn't they have been knocked off? And I thought, okay, yeah, but it's very easy. He might have taken them off when he came in the house. He could have put them back on afterwards. I mean, that's, to me, that was not any remotely kind of a smoking gun. To me, that was a weak argument. Now, Lori's opening statement was, so much of it was really, this is who I am. Let me introduce you to my biography. Things that she normally isn't supposed to be able to say, but she was couching everything in. The evidence will show that. It's like, the evidence will show that I was born in this year. The evidence will show that I used to be a hairdresser. The evidence will show it got to be a little bit ridiculous. She tried to make Charles look like the bad guy. Of course, because Charles and Tylee did have a contentious relationship. That is not a surprise. We know that. But she's like, oh, it was just terrible. And, I didn't want him anywhere near Tylee. And that's why I made him stay in a hotel when he came into town. He took JJ out of school, and his wonderful school in Arizona. It was so good for him, which is ridiculous because she just abandoned JJ for something like 72 days. Like, oh yeah, you really care about him, but whatever. The jury does not yet know squat about anything that happened in Idaho. There have been a couple of little doors opened that I wonder if the state will walk through them eventually. We shall see. But at this point, opening statements, they know nothing. Knowing what we know, however, it almost feels like Lori is blaming Tylee for her own death because she was fighting so much with Charles. She claims it turned physical. I can't imagine that. They had to go to therapy and it was so bad. And if this contention hasn't been there, then maybe Charles wouldn't be dead. Or maybe Tylee wouldn't be dead. She didn't say that because, again, she hasn't brought in the fact that her youngest children are dead and she has been convicted of their deaths. And we ended up with several objections from the state during Lori's opening statement, which is almost unheard of. I would have thought that the state would have hesitated because that might make them look like bullies, but they were sustained. So it was over and over again, things that was hearsay. Lori's claiming that her third husband's death was from a heart attack because we don't know. We don't know. That is speculation and hearsay. We don't know. She also claimed that Charles insisted on coming back to Chandler, even though she didn't want him in town, and she didn't want him and Tylee to be fighting anymore. And she was all mad about that. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. She's also accusing him of not being a good father. And wouldn't he came back to see JJ and to take care of JJ. So, like, which is it? Is he a good dad or is he a bad dad? And then later on, she's claiming that their marriage was fine. They weren't going to get divorced. They were separated and had been for some time. She says that JJ was in the rental car by himself. It was running and he was buckled in, but the car was running. He was only 7. As if that's some awful, like, neglectful thing for a parent to do. When you know what she actually did to JJ, where JJ is now and how he was found, how dare you, Lori, even hint that Charles was an inadequate or harmful parent for running back in the house to grab his phone, which you then refused to give him. So another objection from the state was when Lori claimed that this case was viewed as self-defense right up until, like, for 2 years, until they decided to file charges. And the judge said to disregard that statement. Another objection about how Lori says that Alex died from a blood clot in his lung, and it's like, we don't need to that's irrelevant to any of this. We've had 4 objections that were sustained about relevance, and then the last one was her saying that I am the only person being charged for this crime. Well, probably only because Alex is dead, and there's not enough evidence to convict Chad, even if he was involved. And I think same with both of the Melanies. I think they were involved. We don't have the evidence to convict. So those are my big takeaways from the opening statements from Lori's trial. Now, it is fascinating when we start getting into her cross-examinations. Holy dumpster fire, Batman. I mean, especially when it comes to her own brother, to Nancy Jo Hancock, and to Kay Woodcock. Guys, you're going to want to stay tuned to hear about all of that craziness. Okay, let me know what you think in the comments while you're down there. Drop off some chocolate emojis or your comfort food of choice. And until next time, I'm going to grab myself some chocolate covered toffee that my husband made because it's freaking delicious.